So we are now currently on chapter 8, Blood Baptism. Alright. Farmlands. My documentary about the murders of white South African farmers would become the most notable project of my career. Still, I look back on it like it was an awkward student film, rough around the edges, but somehow capturing the zeitgeist of a cultural film. Of a cultural shift, I'm gonna mess up so much, bro. South Africa has long drawn the attention of great writers. Rudyard Kipling wrote about it often, and J.R.R. Tolkien was born in Bloemfontein, the first city we flew into. I remember climbing into a bakkie as we drove hours out past the Vanderkloof Dam, watching a landscape roll by that looked straight out of Mad Max. The details of that trip have started to fade with time, but while sorting through an old folder on my computer, I came across a journal entry from one of my first nights there. Journal entry. Our guide, Peter, was a strange man, deeply religious, deeply political, well-rounded yet dogmatic. He spoke as if he had stepped out of a Hollywood movie depicting the quintessential colonial man, only addressing my producers each individually as boy. He paused often as he spoke to add emphasis. Peter's truck pulled into a small neighborhood decorated with tin roofs and jagged wood fences, the vehicle jolting back and forth over the rocky dirt road. As we approached the house, Peter stuck his head out the window and broke into some native Bantu language, likely Zulu. A black woman with an inviting smile snapped back in what appeared to be friendly banter. The chatter went on for a minute longer before Peter turned back to us. "Lauren, this is my maid, Mombi. I must return her back to the Black Township. It is only just down the road. It won't take long, but it will be good for you to see how they live." After hearing the words Black Township, my curiosity was immediately sparked. From my Western perspective, apartheid had died with the rise of Mandela. Black and white townships were a thing of the past, so I thought, what? Was that all a fanciful dream? Mombi jumped into the back of the truck and was silent for the rest of the ride. Within minutes, you could see the next township, a collection of huts clustered at the top of a hill. As we made our ascent, plastic bags and cans kicked up behind us. With each block, the sides of the dusty roads were less and less visible under the collections of rubbish marking our path to the Black Township. Peter, in a deliberate fashion, allowed us to observe things for a short while before interjecting. "You see this filth? It is uncivilized. No proper people should live like this." He wasn't wrong, but the trash wasn't so different from the poverty-stricken villages in India I had visited, or even some ghettos in Eastern Europe. It was truly the contrast of the Afrikaner township 5 minutes down the road that emphasized the deficient living conditions. Mommy jumped out of the back of the truck at what appeared to be a bus station of sorts in the township. Where the Afrikaner neighborhood was no beauty, it was opulent in comparison to the shacks with dirt floors and mismatched roofs made of cardboard and tin, which animated their neighboring town. It seemed the dream of equality imposed from a government mandate onto the people was not successful. South African leadership had enough trouble enforcing basic laws, let alone compel social standards. Later we will learn the separation of racial groups came from all sides, voluntarily, in some cases aggressively. Such buildup of racial animosity within the region could not be forgotten so easily. We discussed this phenomenon, among other things, after returning to Peter's humble shack in White Bloemfontein. The sun slipped farther behind the horizon as he cooked steaks over a blackened, rusty fire pit. Peter continued his disquisition on racial problems, violence, fear for his life, the threatened future of the white man within South Africa. It was a theory I heard in passing online, the white genocide against the Afrikaner minority. It ranged from full-blown claims of government-organized death squads to simple speculation around mismanagement investigating farm murders. Either way, Peter was clearly frightened for his and others' lives. "Why not just leave?" I blurted out, somewhat lacking in tact. Peter stopped, holding his tongs just above the sizzling red meat. He motioned his arms toward the vast countryside just behind us. "Have you seen this land, Lauren? This is the land of my forefathers. It is magnificent, grand, but a great many other things beyond mere aesthetics." He paused and stared into the fire, flames flickering in his eyes as he hushed his voice to an almost sinister whisper. He seemed lost in memory, a vision fueled by intense perturbed emotion. "We were enslaved on this land. We fought for this land. We toiled it and built it a great culture and nation here. The stars above it and the crimson dirt below, filled with the blood of my kin. It is the land of God, a biblical place. If I die, I die in this place. I fear cowardice more than death." I can't exactly describe the way he spoke these words. He meant them, though, and I fear he meant a great many other things by them as well. My videographers, Colin and George, sheepishly ate their steak, not wanting to question his fervent speech. I, on the other hand, was somewhat intoxicated by the fanaticism. After complimenting his complimentment, I dismissed myself from the fire circle and wandered to the washroom inside. The light switch was broken, but enough moonlight through the window illuminated the small room. I stared at my feet, fidgeting as I reflected on Peter's musings. Half distracted by my pondering, I almost didn't notice the scorpion that was crawling closer to my toes. It stopped just a few inches from me. I retracted my feet to a safe distance and tucked them under the seat as I nervously observed the creature's tail. I'd honestly only ever seen scorpions in pictures and movies. Africa is a very different place from back home in Canada, I thought, not with any disfavor. South Africa felt spiritual. On our drive through the small towns and cities, we had seen advertisements for witch doctors, tribal people's faces covered in paint to ward off demons, spellcasters, and holy potions. This is not what made Africa feel spiritual, though. What made Africa spiritual was the focus on something greater than self, the critical and constant closeness to the eternal, in both physical and mental terms. Like the scorpion at my foot, death roamed Africa freely. He had many forms to take, not so easily subdued by accessible modern medicine or the strict policing in the West. The bodies of an unusual accident are not covered within a 2-minute period, corpses being incinerated and hidden from public view. Man has not conquered nature in some corners of the earth yet. There was something else too, something in the air, the ambience, the atmosphere, everything was more vibrant. The colors, the people, even the emotions experienced. There was real freedom too, freedom to exercise your greatest dreams and greatest evils with little consequence. The great farmlands and deserts of Africa had no laws, and even if they did, who was going to enforce them? I wasn't particularly a spiritual religious myself, certainly not since childhood and my teenage years, but I continued to discover this inexplicable sensation in many corners of the earth through my travels. I tended to use logic to explain it, but often found myself coming up short for answers. I felt that failed grasping yet again here in this dingy old washroom, contemplating with the scorpion. My scorpion friend twitched and snapped me out of my daydream, reminding me this wasn't a particularly great position to get distracted in. I sculled around the critter with my back to the tiled wall, quickly washing my hands with a dismal bar of soap. I stepped back outside to the now dwindling fire while drying my hands on the sides of my jean shorts. Peter looked visibly pleased that I had returned, not as impressed with the company of my more liberal film crew. "Lauren, you're a Christian, yes?" he asked, or rather stated. I was struggling with my story of real faith or understanding of God, but this didn't seem like the time to disagree or state otherwise. "Yes, I was raised in a Protestant home," I said with a hint of honesty, as I lowered myself back onto the old plastic lawn chair Peter had put out. I knew it, then can only truly understand our struggle. Rensburg says many more of you will come, and on the horizon there will be thousands of white tents with our people. Lauren, come to save us. He went on for some time about prophecies I didn't fully grasp or understand the references to. Eventually, Peter returned us to our lodge, a gated single-floor house overlooking the desert-like landscape. It was the only boarding in the rural region. I settled into bed that night, anxious for what the new day held, whisked away by the darkness turned to dreams. End of journal entry. The events that led me to South Africa were too bizarre to recount properly. All I knew was that I was growing tired of the same old riots, the same old stories. The thought of making yet another video critiquing feminism felt suffocating. It's honestly shocking that people are still milking that cow today. I wanted something real, something raw and impactful to pursue, and the whispers of mass murder in Africa, ignored and buried by mainstream media, were more than just tempting. Just weeks before I landed in Bloemfontein, I was in an upscale flat in central London, and Josh Brandon, a man once profiled by Vice as UK's most expensive male prostitute. I can already hear some readers thinking, Lauren, really? Look, things got rough, but not that rough. He was a gay escort, and a very friendly one at that. We spent the evening talking about God and religion, tearfully sharing our longing for something deeper, something spiritual. Ironically, conversations about God were often more sincere with people like Josh than with the devout believers I grew up around. I was probably a bit more over-emotional at the time, having just cracked open a pack of Solpadeine soluble tablets to mix into my water. Calvin, a new friend and ex-Rebel media videographer I recently started working with, had told me how great they were for flights. They knock you right out. I didn't know they were banned in Canada, partly because of the coding. No wonder I became so obsessed with them. I was keeping a pack or two in my bag for when a headache struck. By that point, anything I published pulled solid numbers. In the world of online media, that's half the battle, getting people to watch. The real issue was that I wasn't a businesswoman. When I was told my audience, all your donations go to create more content, I meant it. I paid myself the Canadian average annual wage, 50,000 CAD, and put every other penny into production. Despite the viral videos and growing attention, both my business and personal bank accounts rarely held more than 10 grand. One night, sitting on Josh's couch, slightly inebriated, I shrugged and muttered, "Fuck it." I bought 3 one-way tickets for Colin, George, and myself to South Africa, draining what was left in my account. We'll make the money back by creating phenomenal work, I told myself, and we did. Farmlands became the most popular project we'd ever produced, racking up nearly 3 million unique views on YouTube, plus DVD sales, film festival screenings, and countless re-uploads in different languages. Nearly every South African I meet has at least heard of the film. There's something undeniably ironic about the fact that this massive piece of right-wing media began with 3 gay men and a woman, all fueled by Solpadeine tablets. The film chronicled the plight of white South African farmers known as the Boers, who were facing brutal racial and class-driven violence. Contacts at progressive outlets told me entire meetings were held just to counter its impact. It became a central talking point in South African politics. Even Donald Trump tweeted about the issue. Australia debated accepting Boer refugees. Russia launched a resettlement program, and 8 years later, Trump officially approved refugee status for some affected farmers. Some of the more extreme claims online didn't hold up, but the crisis was real. South Africa, one of the most violent countries in the world, faced a special kind of brutality, born of unresolved historical trauma. The Rainbow Nation ideal proved to be a political fantasy. True reconciliation never took hold after apartheid, and racial resentment remained sharp across all communities. Western audiences often misunderstand this complexity, treating black Africans as a monolith, unaware of deep inter-tribal divisions and centuries of internal conflict. Like the Mfecane, a period of Zulu expansion under Shaka, which left up to 2 million dead. Bro, I know I butchered that word so badly, dude. I don't even know what that is. South Africa's history is complex, and framing it through an American lens of black and white racial conflict misses the mark. Even among white communities, divisions persisted. I visited the graves of Boer families who died by the thousands in British concentration camps during the colonial era. I also learned that during the Mfecane, some Boer settlers formed alliances with native Khoisan groups. Some of the racial dynamics in South Africa are completely inverted compared to North America. In the US, being a quarter black often means you're considered black. In South Africa, being a quarter white can classify someone as colored, a category that socially and economically often aligns with white communities. For outsiders, the lines of race and belonging can be baffling. Deep inequality underpinned it all. The crabs in a bucket mindset prevailed. If people couldn't rise, they put others down. White farmers, seen as privileged and isolated, became targets of horrific violence. I interviewed a group called the Blood Sisters, women who cleaned up crime scenes after attacks. The stories were grotesque. Babies decapitated, children boiled, victims raped and tortured with nail guns. It was unlike anything I had ever encountered. South Africa was the first time in my media career that I felt a deep, genuine connection to a story I was reporting on overseas. I didn't need to live there to sense the sickness or feel the outrage. It was undeniable. The segregated communities I saw were shocking, but in many ways they were among the tamer scenes I encountered. The level of animosity was palpable. Political parties like the EFF openly called for the mass slaughter of white South Africans. Shoot to kill the Boer. Officials sang from the stage, dancing with drums, as crowd chanted along. It was deranged. But violence wasn't confined to any one group. The moral terrain was shifting and disorienting. Generations had grown up in conflict, and in ruined areas, anyone middle-aged or older had almost certainly witnessed or committed violence firsthand. One night, we drove out to a remote stretch of the Bloemfontein Desert. I lay on the ground with my crew, staring up at the sky so vivid it stopped me cold. Blues, purple, stars like fire. I'd never seen anything like it. No wonder ancient people believed the heavens were above us. Didn't you know the night sky is supposed to be colorful? The magic was abruptly broken when a truck appeared on the horizon, pulling up beside us in the dark. In South Africa, that kind of encounter was never trivial. People alone in isolated places didn't always come back. Our guide Peter gave a subtle nod to reassure us. A man built like an Arnold Schwarzenegger action figure stepped out, followed by a twink. Both wore snug denim shorts, safari shirts, high socks, and work boots. It was surreal. Peter explained the larger man had fought in a war, Rhodesia maybe, and had taken many lives. His slim, blonde partner was a stark contrast, but Peter didn't think. In a country where racial violence was openly endorsed by political factions, sexuality seemed a distant concern. The brought to their farm where animals were treated like family. They once had rhinos, but poachers had taken their horns and left them to die. I watched farmers cry over skeletal remains of horses and cattle, victims of drought, theft, and cruelty. Some animals were left limbless, their bodies were too heavy to steal, the thieves too indifferent to kill them properly. As a kind of initiation, I was taught to hunt. I shot a gazelle, just missing the heart. A guy finished the job, then smeared his blood on my face. They called it a blood baptism. South Africa changed me in ways I didn't expect. It was the first time I witnessed a different kind of humanity, not defined by race or nationality, but by the raw ability to survive. The people on those farmlands had lived through a reality I couldn't have imagined. They could kill without flinching. At night, we slept behind barred windows with weapons or a mace beside the bed. I often lay awake, stomach in knots, ready to vomit at every sound, but I never let anyone see how scared I was. I met a lot of different folks, some very normal families, other fervent activists, even terrorists involved in a foiled bombing plot. Although I don't wish to pretend I know more than I do, all I know is that in South Africa, extremists weren't some strange phenomenon, genetic malfunction, or Hollywood caricature. They were all rather ordinary people, people whose friends had died, whose families had been killed, who feared for their lives and believed they were fighting for something greater. Which is not to say that I condone their actions, I don't. But in South Africa, the word terrorist felt like a non sequitur, a legal term thrust helplessly into the state of nature. It didn't truly fit because it didn't feel like there were laws in South Africa, just a history inked in livid scars and played out beneath that vast, terrible night full of vivid stars. Even so, most of the people I met weren't extremists. They were families, black and white, men and women, trying to survive in a country growing more broken by the day. Afraid, traumatized, with no hope on the horizon. No one coming to save them. I felt deep guilt as I boarded that plane home. I saw things can't put into words. I did not return the same woman. Be yourself, but you change after time. She went somewhere and did not return the same woman. So was she changed by the environment that changed around her? I don't know, bro. I don't know, but that is the end of chapter 7. Sorry, that was the end of chapter 8. Next chapter is chapter 9.
Alright. Chapter 9 is called Politics and Crime. Alright. Even outside South Africa's unique moral landscape, I began to notice a pattern. Just as many criminals and terrorists lean toward the right as any other ideology. Not the top hat and suit conservative like Jacob Rees-Mogg, but more the football hooligan or fundamentalist type. The right often claims the mantle of being tough on crime, but in reality, I've encountered more right-leaning criminals than the right's defenders might like to admit. Especially among career criminals, whether in politics or on the street, there's often a strong undercurrent of authoritarian machismo and resentment politics. At the height of my public life, I felt more judged walking into a hipster cafe than into a room full of tattooed felons. The latter often laughed, listened, and gave my views a fair shake. It's one of those politics funnier contradictions, rarely acknowledged. In some circles, progressives call for jailing people over offensive tweets, while also pushing for early release programs to reduce mass incarceration. Yet those same prisons are often described as some of the most dangerous places on earth for LGBTQ people. The result? A push to imprison people for speech, while releasing those statistically more likely to commit actual violence against minorities. Makes perfect sense, right? Still, I understand the nuance. Most criminals aren't showing up at pride parades with bad intentions. In fact, many follow an unspoken code about who gets hurt. If someone becomes a victim, it's often within a world where everyone knows the risks. Criminals' bigotry tend to be raw and straightforward, unlike the political class, whose prejudice is dressed up in carefully polished language. In some ways, criminals are refreshing for their honesty, and yes, delinquents can be incredibly charismatic. If the right fully grasps what happens behind the scenes, they realize some of their most prominent activists are quite literally criminals, and not just the white-collar kind. This isn't a critique of the right, just a statement of fact. The left also supports criminals with their donations. It's just they either do so knowingly or get duped by less visible figures or faceless organizations. Take the Black Lives Matter organizers who spent millions on mansions. Most people couldn't name them without a Google search. On the right, it's different. Fundraising schemes are often led by well-known figures who seem impervious to cancellation. When they're caught, the fallback response is almost always the same: blame the deep state. Either the charges are fake or the entire operation was some kind of political setup. Look at Steve Bannon's Build the Wall GoFundMe campaign. Multiple people went to prison for fraud, but Bannon, who was pardoned by Trump, walked free after scamming his own base. An interesting decision by Trump, to say the least. The truth is, the most famous right-wing criminal activists are household names, even the ones engaging in more clandestine behavior. 22 was a weird year for me, because it was the first time I encountered people I was considered proper gangsters, for lack of a better word. I can't pinpoint the exact moment I met Tommy Robinson, the infamous former EDL activist and right-wing provocateur. That whole period is a haze. one I've deliberately avoided revisiting until now. For the sake of accuracy, I rely only on the clearest memories. One thing I know for certain, it happened in a pub, and me with Tommy always did. The British, at least the ones I encountered, had a serious problem that ran deeper than mere alcoholism. It wasn't something I observed from a distance. I felt it, lived it. The closest I've come to defining it since when I read Trappist monk Thomas Merton's autobiography. He described England as a vast and complicated charade, a place where most people were already morally dead, asphyxiated by the steam of their own strong yellow tea. Though it certainly wasn't just tea causing the issues. Of course, I found or created that spiritual black hole anywhere. Or I could have found or created that spiritual black hole anywhere. It just happened to take shape most vividly for me in Britain. Still, to their credit, even the worst pub in Europe has more charm than the best in North America. We were in a not very nice pub, somewhere in Luton or Flitwick maybe, I can't remember. But it had that unmistakable British character, wooden beams, framed old newspapers, and football paraphernalia I couldn't begin to identify. My video crew and I perched on the stools while Tommy introduced me to a few mates as they walked in. I vividly remember a man in his late 20s or early 30s walking in. A deep scar slashed across his face. He shook my hand, and he and Tommy swapped stories about their clashes with the local Pakistani community. I listened carefully, though I wasn't convinced every detail was accurate. From what I gathered, their crew had gotten into a scrap and harmed a member of an Islamic gang. In retaliation, a Pakistani gangster showed up at the man's nephew, crushed him and attacked him with a machete, leaving the scar. Despite the ambush, he fought back and survived. Most of Tommy's mates had similar war stories, but none more so than his cousin Kev. I could barely process half of what I was hearing, yet out of everyone I met, I had always had a soft spot for Kev, or at the very least, I found his retelling of violent tales darkly entertaining. A carpenter by trade, Kev had his own way of handling unpaid debts. When clients refused to pay up, he'd take a chainsaw to their kitchens, reducing them to sawdust. He'd been in more than a few fights, most of which he claimed to win, and the way he told his stories had Colin and me in stitches. Over the years, I've seen the mainstream media try to report on the drugs and crime circulating through certain right-wing spaces, hoping to spark concern from the supposedly law and order crowd, but they were usually met with cries of fake news. It's their own fault, to be fair, a kind of boy who cried wolf situation, with too many wildly misleading stories. Still, in this case, the reports of rampant drug use and criminal behavior in British right-wing circles were accurate. Cocaine, in particular. One thing I learned during my time in politics is that the right loves their cocaine. If you had told my high school self that in 5 years I'd be doing bumps with my favorite Fox News personalities, I wouldn't have known whether to be thrilled or horrified. Probably just disappointed. For context, my cocaine use comes later in the story. I hadn't touched the stuff yet. These stereotypes exist for a reason. Leftists tend to prefer downers and psychedelics. The right leans towards uppers. The resulting shifts in brain chemistry and emotion often play out in predictable ways. But it wasn't just about cocaine. There seemed to be an entire operation behind the clashes with immigrant gangs. At the center of it all, the tension between small-town Muslims and the football lads felt less like politics, more like a gang war disguised as a political movement. It just so happened that all of this spilled onto social media, generating a wave of anti-immigrant buzz. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty to criticize about mass immigration, especially the grooming gangs, which the British government largely covered up. The documents that have since emerged are enough to make anyone sympathize with those claiming to fight the system, whether their motives were honest or not. Somebody is listening to me right now. It is Ivan Lean. Ivan, would you like to say something to the viewers right now?
What does it mean to be yourself?
Ivan, shut up, bro. I think that's what happened with Tommy. People felt abandoned, and they were. The media and government were complicit in covering up horrific crimes against British girls. People were desperate for a hero, any hero, and yet there was something deeply ironic about how the online opposition to these gangs formed. What are you doing?
I'm gonna lie in my bed.
Okay, and I continue reading book.
Yes, you do.
Yes, I do. Alright, what you just heard was Ivan. Ivan is a dude that is basically an idiot. Let's just say he's an idiot. When it comes to Tommy, imagine if a significantly less competent Tony Soprano started a Twitter account and began tweeting about anti-Italian discrimination and the death of freedoms in America every time the feds raided his house. That's essentially what I was witnessing. Worse, Tony discovered that there's an enormous amount of profit in fleecing good-heated Americans. Huh?
the Chinese thing, Google Meets.
Oh, you got in it?
Yeah.
I'm coming. For Cash to fight his legal battles while misrepresenting every single one of them as part of some tyrannical communist conspiracy against him. Alright, so basically what Ivan just said is that he got into a meme, which is a meme about traditional Chinese values or something like that versus modern ones. So I'm gonna go listen to that too. Be right back. Alright, continuing on. When it comes to Tommy, imagine if a significantly less competent Tony Soprano started a Twitter account and began tweeting about anti-Italian discrimination and the death to freedoms in America every time the feds raided his house. That's essentially what I was witnessing. Worse, Tony discovered that there's an enormous amount of profit in fleecing good-hearted Americans for cash to fight his legal battles, while misrepresenting every single one of them as part of some tyrannical communist conspiracy against him. Meanwhile, my entire video crew and I, along with all the support staff working on the media side of the project, had to endlessly watch tens of thousands of these donations being pulled out of ATMs to pay for hookers, blow, and new flat-screen TVs. Did we say anything? Not really. Not while staying silent still benefited us. For some, the guilt eventually led them to distance themselves or speak up, but anyone who did speak up was immediately branded a far-left activist, with a mob of sycophantic fans unleashed on them. Tommy's former videographer, Lucy Brown, was horrendously slandered, suffered severe mental health issues, and feared walking the streets. It taught people to keep their mouths shut. Dang, Lucy Brown. That's probably a pseudonym, but I understand. Even mainstream journalists fear reporting on him because of the consequences. Take The Independent's Lizzie Dearden, for example. She reached out to Tommy Robinson for comment on a story about his alleged misuse of supporter donations. Soon after, he showed up at her home in the middle of the night, shouting threats and falsely accusing her partner of being a pedophile. It was a clear attempt to intimidate her into silence, using the exact tactic he claimed to oppose slander. She ultimately secured a 5-year stalking protection order against him, but the message was sent: cross the man even just to ask for clarification, and you risk your safety. And for what? Not a single one of his supporters will hear a word of it anyway. They just believe whatever the latest viral X account for Patriots post read, AI generated slop for ad revenue, and dismiss everything else as fake news. Honestly, no one understands this better than those of us who knew him. Lucy and I still find ourselves laughing hysterically at the stories we shared while working with Tommy. Despite our respective falling outs, part of us still wants to believe in him. There was something good buried beneath the mask, something we kept hoping was resurface. He's your Peter Pan figure, but not the Disney kind. The character was partly inspired by the Greek god who lured people astray with his flute. In some versions, the Lost Boys don't stay young because of magic, but because they're killed in Peter's endless games of war. Christina Henry's Lost Boy, the true story of Captain Hook, explores this darker angle, where Peter is not the hero but a manipulative tyrant. Hook, in that telling, is just one of the boys who survived, grew up, and saw Peter for who he really was. Lucy and I often feel like Hook. Unfortunately, that just makes us look like bitter hags trying to ruin the fun. Oh well. To this day, even the sharpest minds on the mainstream right seem unable to grasp what really went on, as Tommy continues to land prime-time interviews with major outlets, oblivious to the truth. I admit there's a trace of undeserved bitterness in how I view that, frustration with others for not knowing things I refuse to share myself. Seriously though, he's in jail right now. I wrote this in late 2024. Tommy was released in May 2025. If you ask the average right-winger, they'll tell you it's simply because the government are wankers. But the reality is more complicated. Two things can be true at once. The government are in fact wankers, and Tommy is in jail for exposing grooming gangs, fighting the state, or fighting for free speech. He's in jail for contempt of court after refusing to comply with an injunction following a libel ruling involving the defamatory remark he claims he made about a child, Jamal Hijazi. Before I dive in, it's important to acknowledge that this case is long and messy. I'll only touch on a few key points here, but first I need to make clear, it seems like everyone involved was lying at a rate that could destabilize the laws of physics. Mostly because the case consisted of a bunch of kids, which is why the main focus was on Tommy, an adult who has a platform that reaches millions. So when he lies, the consequences are far greater, and that's what sparked the legal case. Jamal was already the target of persistent bullying at school. A viral video showed another student, Bailey McLaurin, grabbing Jamal by the throat, throwing him to the ground, and pouring water over his face while saying, you bastard, I'll drown you." At the time, Jamal was already wearing a cast from a separate incident earlier the month. The footage quickly spread online, igniting a media frenzy and public accusations of racism against McLaurin. I'll get into the specific libel against Jamal in a minute, but first you should understand that Tommy's efforts to smear him initially stemmed from a desire to clear McLaurin's name. Someone who admittedly should never have been thrust into the public eye or labeled a racist by media vultures seeking their next headline. There was no evidence it was a racist attack, only that it was bullying. If this were Tommy's only claim, he wouldn't be in jail. The judge in this case ultimately reached a similar conclusion, recognizing both boys as victims. They were torn apart by slanderous partisan media campaigns driven by money-hungry adults. Neither of the boys were saints, but that doesn't mean we get to lie about either of them. However, for Tommy, it wasn't just about money or defending a random school kid accused of racism. A crucial detail everyone on the right seems to be forgetting, or rather were conveniently never told, is that Bailey McLaurin's older brother is actually a close friend of Tommy's, and also a convicted cocaine smuggler. So if you're wondering, what would motivate Tommy to lie about a 15-year-old boy? Well, those sorts of ties in his world run deep. For Tommy, it wasn't enough to say there was no clear evidence Bailey's attack was racially motivated. He had to make it seem notable. He posted 2 viral Facebook videos claiming falsely that Jamal had violently assaulted young English girls, beaten one black and blue, and even threatened to stab someone. The fallout was severe. The Hijazi family had to relocate, and both Jamal and his sister were pulled from school. Unsurprisingly, the family sued, saying these claims were entirely false. Because he hadn't actually gathered any evidence before making the accusations, Tommy later canvassed the neighborhood, asking parents and teachers about Jamal's behavior in school. He secretly recorded their answers to a series of extremely leading questions, trying to dig up retroactive justification. He then attempted to reintroduce these recordings as hearsay evidence in his trial for defamation, but the judge noted that the law states selective extracts from hearsay generally represent unsatisfactory evidence. The Hijazi family ultimately won in court after the judge found Tommy unable to prove the substantial truth of his claims. In fact, in some cases, the family was able to directly disprove them. There's far more to this case than most people realize. If you're generally interested, read the judgment in Hijazi vs. Yaxley Lennon, especially the section addressing the so-called hockey stick incident, where Jamal was accused of injuring a girl so badly that she needed an MRI, X-rays, medication, and later developed anxiety. In court, it was revealed to be nothing more than a widespread rumor. There were no credible witnesses, no school reports, no MRI record, in fact, no medical records at all, except one girl when the girl's GP confirmed 2 years later that she had no medical problems. Her anxiety, the court found, actually predated the alleged incident. Another one of the many false claims Tommy promoted was the so-called biting incident, based on a Facebook message she received from a mother who said her daughter had been attacked by 3 girls, and that Jamal had joined in and bitten her on the head. But after realizing Tommy had used her story in a viral video, the mother publicly commented it wasn't him, it was the 3 girls. He didn't do anything. This should not have been posted until the full story was told. Delete it now. She continued, "Look, he didn't touch. I was talking to Tommy about it, cause my girl didn't get the meal when she was horrifically attached. That's all end of." She even texted Tommy that her motivation for reaching out was her frustration that the attack on Jamal had already raised 100 quid, but that the assault on her daughter hadn't received any attention from either the school or the media. "It's ridiculous," she texted. Like this allegation, nearly everyone Tommy made collapsed under cross-examination in court, where actual evidence was required. The court found Tommy liable, ordered him to pay the Hijazi family 100 quid, and joined him from ever speaking about the incident again. At this point, it might have still been an honest mistake. Maybe Tommy didn't realize his sources were twisting the truth. But instead of backing down after losing in court, 18 months later, he doubled down, releasing a documentary titled Silence that claimed the court was suppressing free speech. In it, he published the secret recordings he had previously made of teachers and community members, presenting that evidence to the world as if it had not already been contradicted by testimony in court. In the documentary, Tommy refers to the biting claim again. In one of his secret recordings, he confronts the same mother, pressuring her to say that she only retracted her statements because of threats. She awkwardly replied, "Yeah, but the court had rightly dismissed this as not credible." The judge pointed out that it was second-hand hearsay from someone who had already publicly disavowed the story, and that the footage was not only selectively edited before being submitted, but that even in its edited form, it was unclear whether the woman was responding "yeah" to "was he there,"
or was he involved? Let's be real, she had already admitted to lying for attention on Facebook immediately after Tommy published the claims. She was clearly a fan of his and believed the conversation was private. It was a way to get his attention. Once she realized the damage her claim had caused, she tried to walk it back before the court case had even begun. It's not hard to understand that most people would be too embarrassed to explain the truth, especially when their political idol shows up unannounced wearing a hidden camera. Tommy used these recordings in silence to push the narrative of a cover-up, that Jamal was a violent woman beater. Some featured teachers or school staff, but many of their claims directly contradicted official reports and behavior logs. I wasn't planning to dwell on this case, but I had to highlight a few examples. There are many more, because let's be honest, hardly anyone in right-wing media has actually read the documents. The court repeatedly warned him to stop publishing the false claims, but he ignored every order and didn't even attend some of the hearings about his conduct. For the record, I don't care whether libel comes from the left or the right, I'm against it. You might have heard a beep. That was my computer beeping for some reason. Sorry if that scared you. Anyways, let's go on. To top it off, Rebel Media launched a fundraiser seeking up to 130 quid for Tommy's legal defense in his contempt of court hearing, only for him not to put up a legal defense and fully admit that he had breached the injunction from the original trial. Later, they promoted additional fundraisers claiming he was being persecuted in prison, including being forced into segregation as political punishment. In reality, he was offered the option to leave segregation but declined. For the same reason he was placed there in the first place, for his own safety. Court records also note that his visits, costs, and privileges were, to quote the judgment, substantially more than those of any other prisoner. I'm not here to say what Tommy does or doesn't deserve, and I'm not claiming the courts handled everything perfectly either, but let's be real. I know she says let's be real a lot, this might be her quirk. But let's be real, almost everything you've heard about this case from right-wing pundits is nonsense. After endless fundraisers and petitions that never seem to lead anywhere, you think people would start to catch on, like, hello, wake up. It's a business model, and trust me, I know, I used to work for it. I fell for it harder than anyone. Whether Tommy was in solitary, general population, or free, they spin a story of abuse to fundraise. That's the crux of it. Like how Black Lives Matter had increasingly leaned on weaker cases to sustain momentum. Tommy and Rebel Media rely on perpetual victimhood. At this point, both are incentivized to manufacture outrage to keep it alive rather than resolve any of the issues they complain about. It will never end, and they don't want it to. It's too profitable. We can't win because it's not about truth, it's about narrative. To be fair, not all right-wing organizations operate this way, and those pointing out a two-tier justice system aren't wrong. Tommy may be guilty, but so are the pedophiles and grooming gang offenders who've gotten off with barely a slap on the wrist. The truth doesn't fit nearly into either side's story. What this all points to is that the public image of Tommy as a hero is as false as most of the images of public heroes, mine included. It's a facade. Yet people have defied him, losing sight of the actual human being. Defied? Or is it defied? Oh well. Those of us who've truly spent time with him are left with a bleak choice. Play along to survive in the Mio tribe, speak up and be defamed ourselves, or be defamed anyway, and quietly lose our minds. For the better part of a decade, I chose to stay quiet and slowly lose my mind. That choice felt easier back when the mythology around Tommy hadn't yet grown into the behemoth it is today. I told myself I wasn't in a position to judge anyone involved in the darker sides of the world. People like Tommy, most of them had grown up surrounded by violence and racial tension, poverty-stricken, working-class neighborhoods. Whether British or immigrant, many were clearly battling deep PTSD and addiction. It was all they knew. I catch fragments of stories whenever I spend time with Tommy and his crew. I remember someone telling me, though I never knew how true it was, that two men once came to Kev's house to kill or attack him, and he grabbed the shotgun barrel and fought them off. Other times I'd be in the car while people casually chatted about the going rate for a hitman. Between the stories, what I saw, and the gallows humor I got pulled into, reality blurred. I overheard conversations so compromising that I started tuning them out, like background chatter about fantasy football. During that time, I spent weeks traveling through Europe, crashing in London with Callan and George, surrounded by strange characters. I wasn't just gaining a few 100,000 views anymore. My content, especially on the Islamization of the UK, was hitting millions. If you read earlier phrases like machete gang fights with Pakistanis and thought, why did this clueless girl just go home?
then you might not grasp the power of hundreds of thousands of people telling you you're saving the West, especially when they believe the people around you are also nation-saving legends. These weren't just great video lore and comments, they were emails, letters, video essays, thousands of messages from people in tears saying I'd restore their faith in the future. My parents were proud, unaware of the world I was now immersed in. I didn't have the heart to tell them. Honestly, I'm not sure I fully understood it myself. My own doubts were being drowned out by the starstruck, out of her depth girl I still was inside. What's crazy is that somehow I was sober in all of the content I made during this period. I hadn't yet indulged in the lifestyle around me, I was just running on adrenaline. My videos confronting police, shouting at protesters, and throwing myself into chaos weren't the work of someone high, just my best efforts to embody the heroine people online wanted to save them. My time in the UK led to videos like a London mosque called the police on me and asking feminists, women's rights, or Islam. Oh bro, I remember this. This content took off across platforms and cemented my place in that world. Bro, someone open the door again and interrupt my... What time is it?
It's not time yet.
Alright. Where do you guys win the Popeyes?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Go.
And what?
Just keep doing what you're doing.
Bro, I can't. I gotta go back into the zone. Let me pause the recording real quick. Alright, continuing on where I last left off. They wanted me to watch a movie, but the movie was so terrible. Let's see. The energy around each video was intoxicating. Watching the views climb, the comments pour in, the reaction videos roll back. It was a rush. It wasn't just the public we were working into a frenzy. It felt even better when we provoked the police or the government. For a moment, it felt like the world was at our feet. All eyes were on us, on me, waiting to see what we would do next. And when it wasn't me, it was Tommy or someone else in our circle, and we got a high by proxy. We built a little digital crack house. I believe in the idea of energy on the metaphysical level, not in a crystal healing horoscope kind of way, but in the sense that people can feel where attention goes. I am no mystic, but I know what I felt. When thousands of people were watching me, it created a high that's hard to explain, better than most drugs. Other public figures talk about quietly, if at all. It sounds strange to admit, like you're confessing to being fueled by attention, vampiric, but it's real. I haven't felt that level of visibility in a long time, and I don't miss it. Like any addiction, it drags you into places you never intended to go. You can break it down as dopamine, feedback loops, brain chemistry, but that only scratches the surface. Unlike typical YouTube content such as makeup tutorials, live streams, or vlogs, our videos bled into real life in ways most creators never experience. We weren't just chasing views, we were political activists trying to influence public life. That made the energy around what we did far more intense. When we walked into a room, the reaction was visceral. People treated Tommy, me, and any YouTubers around us like little gods. This wasn't a normal effort and reward cycle. It was a completely unbalanced incentive structure, unlike anything humans are built to handle. Even now, I'm not sure my brain fully understands what happened. Around this time, YouTube vloggers like Jake and Logan Paul were constantly in the headlines as people began to question the nature of their fame. Had they gone too far? Were they just chasing dopamine? I remember a mid-2017 video where they lit a mattress on fire and threw it into a pool in their upscale LA neighborhood. Neighbors called the police, the media swarmed, it all spiraled into chaos, a sacrifice to the content gods. People started asking to what end. The popularity of this kind of spectacle and the need to keep escalating it began to feel like a dark omen for humanity's future. What struck me wasn't the chaos itself, but how little self-awareness there was in the outrage. I could understand why the Paul brothers kept pushing limits. The high in the financial gain is real. What I found more curious was why so many people couldn't look away. After all, without an audience, there's no burning mattress. But unlike the creators, viewers don't get the same hit of adrenaline. I felt the difference between watching and being the spectacle. So what kept people coming back? Morbid curiosity. I need to see the boundaries push. Whatever it was, I wasn't one-sided. Their content reflected the audience's hunger, just as mine once did. We all shape the current. Every click helps build the world we live in. Alright, that's another chapter 9, sorry. Lawrence said something right there that was actually pretty, you can say it's really broad. As like currently today's economy, right? There's like a lot of trends and changes, but all of that is reflected on what we want to see, basically. So you could say that there's a lot of like degenerate stuff out there, or things that are like dangerous or becoming more wild, and it's becoming different than what it was before, right? But at the same time, it's because people watch them in the first place. So you could say that's a reflection of what our human desires are, even though it's like it might not be good, but that's what they've done to make. You can like capitalize on that to make money, basically. Um, I guess it's pretty simple. Anyways, you just if you want to make money, do what the other people want, even though it might not be good though. I guess, but that means does that mean if you do it the right way, you won't make as much money? Maybe, but it's still the right way. Oh well, that's the end of chapter 9. Now it's chapter 10, Scam Economy. I'm sitting in the cafe writing again. I've been here almost every day for the past week. This morning was the first time they prepared my order without me even asking. A London fog, 1 pump of sugar-free vanilla, is the closest thing I could get to a hot chocolate that feels sophisticated. I sit in the very back, facing the door. From here I can see everyone who walks in, their expressions. The way they disappear into their screens. I guess I'm a little nosy, not in a weird way, just quietly fascinated by the lives unfolding around me. To my left, a girl taps away at her laptop. She's using ChatGPT to help her write. Maybe schoolwork, maybe copy for a job. For a second, I wonder if I'm being ridiculous for doing the old-fashioned way. Sure, I've used AI now and then to clean up grammar and tighten the paragraph, but hilariously often, it flags my writing as against policy. It's almost reassuring, like even the machine doesn't know what to do with my life. Lately, I've come to feel that my stories might be the last real thing I have left to offer. In a world increasingly polished, optimized, and filtered, I'm still chasing those raw, unrepeatable human moments. The ones that don't trend, the ones that sound made up when you try to explain them. No algorithm can recreate those, and while it's easier than ever to simulate connection, adventure, even love, it's not the same. If you've really lived, you know the difference. There's no substitute for the real thing. She's so right, dude. Actually, what this is like one of the reasons why I bought this book, because out of everything out there, the way she advertised this book in the first place made it seem like she was so real about it, like she wanted to tell exactly her truth without like the intention of, like, a lot of people accuse her of advertising her book just to make more money, but if you look at it, dude, like she's taking a huge risk for this, and I generally don't think she's doing this in for the money. This is like the real thing, like real raw unfiltered things nowadays is so hard, and generally does feel like a lot of people nowadays are like faking everything just for like their own selfish benefits, whatever it may be. All right, anyways, my friends who are about a decade older always have the best stories. They live in that disjointed in-between phase, a foot in both worlds before it was all digitized. I'll hear them toss out lines like no one had iPhones, we could get away with anything. They're not wrong. There's a strange kind of irony in the fact that while people in the early 2000s were panicking about video games making kids violent, that fear never really played out in real life, and if anything, technology had the opposite effect. That's not to say the internet did mess us up, especially as younger millennial and Gen Z. I still remember the first gore clip I saw. Man's face split open on a concrete corner after a failed dive. Holy shit, dude, I saw that same video on YouTube before. It was so fucking traumatizing. People were trying to hold his skin. Ew, I clicked away before this part, but I remember, like, that was so nasty. People were trying to hold his skin together. Blood was everywhere. It burnt into my brain. We watched beheadings on live leaks, sex crimes, torture, and fistfights, sometimes in class. By the time we learned to drive, many of us had already seen 1,000 people die on screen. Repetition replaced empathy. Holy crap, 1,000? Well, what? Why would you watch that much, though? Jesus, Lord. And yet, the actual data shows boomers and Gen X were more likely to commit crimes than younger generations. The difference is surveillance. Millennials were more likely to get arrested, not because we did worse things, but because we were being watched. Gen Z, meanwhile, are the least likely to commit crime, and yet the most likely to be caught. People love to blame kids these days for the state of the world, but the truth is, boomers got away with everything. There just weren't any records. If it sounds like I'm romanticizing time when people got away with more, maybe I am. Not because I think crime is noble, but because I don't believe we've eliminated bad behavior, we just digitized it. At least with physical violence, there's no ambiguity. You know what happened. It's more honest. But can we really say crime has decreased, or has it just become more underhanded, more cowardly? In place of physical crime, we've bred a new class of criminal, one the law barely recognizes. They exploit the detached, digital, dehumanized nature of modern life to commit crimes that are harder to name, but just as damaging. Culture isn't more trustworthy now. It just feels like we've adapted to a constant low-level state of distrust, safe in our homes,
while our minds are violated by governments, corporations, and scammers every minute of every day. Even 5 years ago, unknown number might have been someone I knew. Now, probably a scam. After publishing a few ebooks, I started getting spoof calls, fake literary agents offering deals for a fee. Their sites look real until you look closer. Stock photos, AI bios, no history. I never believed Barnes and Nobles was courting my canceled stuff, but it still wears me down. The emails are worse. They use my full name, my data, fake show bookers, fake banks, fake government agencies. The only logical conclusion I can draw from the sheer volume of these scams is that they must be working on someone and not just someone's grandmother. I've come to believe that many criminals were left behind by the digital shift. They couldn't adapt. Traditional crime relied on proximity, physical intimidation, or community-based trust, things that don't easily translate to the online world. But not all criminals were left behind. Some, especially those who embody that fractured in-between millennial mindset, developed skill sets that bridge both worlds. I saw firsthand with the early political fundraising scams, but things truly escalated with the rise of crypto. In 2017 and 2018, not every micro-influencer was pushing pump and dump altcoin yet. Back then, young investors and well-meaning naive influencers had no idea how much chaos these crypto scammers were about to unleash, or how far they'd go to use their new money to influence the world. I'm not entirely sure how the conversations leading up to it went, and part of me dreads just how sinister they may have been. But around February 2018, Tommy mentioned to Calvin, George, and me that he had been in contact with some wealthy crypto investors in Eastern Europe who might be interested in sponsoring a larger media project we could all build together. Things were going incredibly well with my YouTube views, but as any up-and-coming online influencer knows, you can never just be okay with things. You're always chasing the next big idea, the next project, the next opportunity. A right-wing European media outlet hosted by some of the most famous figures in the dissident right? It sounded crazy, but with the right funding, maybe it could work. How could I say no? Alright, I guess chapter 10, Scam Economy. I think this is the part leading up to what Lauren published as like the free part. Remember in her Substack? I think this is the one where it came out about like Andrew Tate and all that. The flights were booked almost instantly by the investors, and I will never forget showing up at the airport in Luton with Callie and George early in the morning. Tommy was off his head as usual, but I wasn't familiar enough with the antics of cocaine addicts to fully understand the gravity of it. He wore a matching designer tracksuit, a typical look, and kept clenching his jaw, motor mouthing between paranoid rants and overly enthusiastic anticipation. He's somehow smuggling an absurd amount of cocaine through airport security, incredibly cheeky about it as always. Now, I know the TSA and every equivalent agency is largely nothing more than a time-wasting joke, but back then I still clung to the illusion that airport security actually served a purpose. Watching Tommy slip into the plane's bathroom again and again to do lines left me in a surreal state. It felt like I was living on autopilot, watching a movie I didn't understand. When that was no longer my story but someone else's, I've heard every motivational podcast about taking extreme responsibility for your life. And maybe in a twisted way, I tried to avoid responsibility by taking my hands off the wheel entirely, as if I had no role in the truck flying off the cliff. My people-pleasing passive self had no business being on that plane unsupervised with a coked-up Tommy en route to some shady mean in Eastern Europe. But there I was, nodding along to every unhinged plan like it made perfect sense. Honestly, I was just as bad as Tommy, only I didn't need cocaine to fuel my delusions. He was probably doing drugs because he knew how insane everything was. I was worse. I actually thought it was serious. I was sitting there, mentally drafting business talking points, wondering if we needed a Google Docs slideshow. Guys, we have a plan here. Anytime I asked them about the investors, the answers were vague and broken. Something about a professional boxer or whatever. Why a boxer in Eastern Europe would want to invest in our company was beyond me. But sure, they paid for the flights and agreed with me. What's the worst that could happen? When we landed in Romania, Tommy told us the investors had sent cars. You're gonna love these blokes, he chirped, still buzzing while the rest of us were groggy from the morning flight. We grabbed our bags and headed for the airport exit. I traveled through enough of Europe, including the old Eastern Bloc, to be familiar with the dreary landscapes and brutalist architecture, but the people waiting for us were hard to miss. They stood out like sore thumbs against the washed-out Balkan backdrop and the aging Dacia Supernovas from 2001. Two sharply dressed men leaned against polished sports cars, waving as we rolled our suitcases down the walkway. The cars looked comically out of place and completely impractical for our luggage, but I wasn't about to complain. At least the investors clearly had money. I've never ridden in a car like that before. Tommy claps hands with his acquaintances in one of those firm Poland handshakes that turned into a quick back pat half hug, the kind that was more about respect than warmth. As it turned out, the pair were brothers, and after the greeting, they ushered us into the cars, but not before making it clear that I would be personally escorted by a man named Andrew. He had a wide grin and a unique lisp that reminded me of an old childhood friend, but seemed a bit too eager to get me alone. I figured we were all headed to the same place anyway, and Colin, George, and Tommy all knew where I was and who I was with. Andrew seemed harmless enough, maybe even a fan. I didn't want to overthink it. Before I'd even finished building my seatbelt, he was telling me how much he liked my work. Alright, I noticed something. Whenever someone says they don't want to overthink it, it usually means that they were attracted by someone. As I remember one of my friends pretty much saying the same thing. They're afraid of overthinking. Which basically translates to they don't want to say something bad and screw up something that could potentially be like really, really good, you know? So they're being cautious whenever they say they don't want to overthink. Anyways, I won't pretend I remember exactly how the conversation went, but Andrew clearly viewed me as some kind of hero, someone saving the Western world. He'd watched plenty of my content. He referenced it, almost reverently. Between flirtatious smiles and compliments, he was nice, charming even. And I won't lie, I wasn't exactly disappointed to get a break from Tommy's antics and have a conversation with someone who was actually sober. Tommy mentioned he needed a nap before our meeting with the investors that evening. He needed much more than a nap. So after we stopped at the hotel, Andrew asked if I was hungry and if he could take me to grab an early dinner before we met up at the compound later. The sun was still high, we had plenty of time to kill, so I said yes without thinking. I wasn't in the habit of turning down food. Here's the financial stress made me frugal to a fault. My travels around Europe were basically a McDonald's tour, something my friends constantly teased me about. The steakhouse Andrew took me to was a stark departure from my usual dining choices. I say it was upscale, but everything seemed fancy compared to my chicken nugget diners. We really did get along, but seeing someone with so much apparent wealth and success, I found myself curious about his ultimate goals in life. The Tate brothers carried themselves like they owned the place, well-dressed, fit, with nice cars, enough money to start an entire news organization. I don't know if I was slowly waking up from my dopamine-induced days, but part of me was just not satisfied with what I was seeing or where I was going. If I built a news network, if I got more fame, if I got more wealth, what was it all for? I wanted to know where this was headed. I can't help but laugh at the way I used to question men. They'd confidently declare their plans to dominate their field or conquer the world, and I would simply stare into their eyes and ask, but why? For what? What does this do for your soul? I watched something in them crack, something I didn't understand yet. Really, I asked them those questions because they were the same ones I was asking myself. Some part of me hoped these successful men would have the answer, but I hadn't yet realized that part of the journey up meant taking those kinds of questions and lining them up against the wall for execution without trial. Looking back, it's clear Andrew humored a lot of my queries, especially those about whether he wanted to start a family or get married someday. If I found the right woman, of course, that's what life is all about. Family. It's how we rebuild Western civilization, he mused. But he lingered on that if just a little too long for it to feel sincere. There was an awkwardness in his response, like he was nervous I might see through it. I remember this part of our conversation well. It was the first moment that things felt off. I hadn't learned to spot red flags yet, at least not the kind that wore nice clothes, smiled politely, and echoed your politics back to you like a mirror. Bro, nice clothes, smiled politely, echoed your politics back to you like a mirror? Is that a red flag? Huh? Alright, okay. Dinner had relaxed me more than it should have. It was almost a rehearsed level of calm. He never said anything wrong, and maybe that was a red flag. Bro, I got a red flag in my previous relationship because I said something wrong, dude. Oh my goodness, dude. Well, alright, anyways. After the meal, we returned to the hotel to prepare for the investment meeting. I don't know what I was expecting the meeting to look like, but it certainly wasn't what I found myself walking into. With Colin, George, Tommy, all loaded into sports cars, Andrew and his brother Tristan drove us through the dreary side streets of a Bucharest neighborhood not far from our hotel.
The final destination didn't look like much at first, just a generic industrial warehouse. But when the giant black gate rolled open, it revealed a scene that would have been obvious to me as a criminal operation if I had any clue how the world worked. We were greeted by glowing blue pool surrounded by luxury cars as we stepped onto the tiled entrance. The building itself looked like it had been designed by edgy Reddit mods and anime nerds turned Marie Kondo minimalist fanatics. A giant samurai statue was one of the few decorations in the entryway, and flat-screen TVs adorned the walls, flashing cryptocurrency prices. It felt like every decision made here was exactly what a 10-year-old would do if they suddenly became a multimillionaire. I want fancy cars, a glowing pool, a big samurai statue, girls, and my favorite e-celebrities. What was more interesting than the decor, though, were the people in the building. At this point, it was hard to tell who was in charge. Was it the brothers or the nerdy-looking crypto bros sitting around a table on computers, eyes glued to their investment screens? It almost seemed like the brothers were the muscle and drivers, while the crypto guys were the ones doing the actual work. I was suddenly snapped out of my fascination with the scenery by an overwhelming sense that something was terribly wrong with Tommy. I'm not sure he had even napped at all. Had he somehow gotten more drugs since landing in Bucharest? It certainly looked that way. Callan and George exchanged concerned, knowing glances as we watched Tommy lob one social grenade after another into what we'd hoped would be a productive investment meeting. It was nothing short of a disaster. It was beyond obvious to everyone in the room that they were either speaking to a severely mentally ill man or someone inhabiting a completely different drug-induced realm. Watching the reaction of the main crypto bro was something I wish I could describe in a way beyond writing. It's not a perfect comparison, but imagine Donny Azoff, Jonah Hill, and the Wolf of Wall Street enduring Tommy's ramblings. The whole scene felt straight out of an SNL sketch. From this point forward, I'll call this guy Donnie. Alright, so I guess he's a nerdy person, huh? What was even more fascinating, though, was that Tommy's behavior had no apparent effect on the pitch being delivered from across the table. Donnie pointed to one of the screens and confidently announced that what appeared to be millions of dollars displayed in green pixels was what their coins were making in just the last 24 hours. I looked up at the screen as the numbers kept climbing, another $10,000 as I was watching. It was incomprehensible to me. We had just entered the era of crypto scams collapsing, but it still hadn't fully settled into the public's consciousness just how far-reaching these pump-and-dump schemes were. I don't think I, or many other influencers at the time, really understood all the altcoin jargon yet. My head was spinning, Tommy chewing on nothing, Callie and George doing their best to look engaged, and the Tate brothers casually lounging in their muscle shirts. I really wish I could remember the exact name they pitched to us. If I could, it would probably make you laugh, but after an exhausting technical monologue, Donnie put his hands on the table, looked up, and said, "We'll call it Freedom Token," or some nonsense like that. Oh no, I thought. Fuck. They want us to sell cryptocurrency. Is this even investment mean at all? Despite my growing realization, I still want to make something out of all this. I had nothing to lose at that point, so I interrupted rather awkwardly. The coin stuff is really interesting, but do you plan on putting an initial investment into this media company we're starting, or is this going to be entirely a crypto operation? The men at the table seemed caught off guard, but Donnie quickly scrambled to reassure me. Absolutely, we can come to an agreement. We cover the initial operating costs of the news network and link this token to it, making it mutually beneficial for everyone. Bro, these fucking deal people who think they're so good at like negotiation, they always say one thing: mutual beneficial, bro. They say that, bro. The mutual benefit thing, but they only it's so like they're gonna BS and prioritize them over yourself, dude. So they say mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial for everyone. Honestly, the token will be something all patriots can get behind. It will just be a side operation, more of a way for your viewers to earn by sharing and engaging with your content. Barely the focus of your project. Plus, we give you all shares of the token for your own benefit. Alright, I just went on a small rant, right? But it's kind of similar to how Lauren said before about how she's also making content that she's doing it for her viewers, right? The viewers wanted like more and more, so she was like doing it more and more, even though she's not really being herself, but she's doing it for the like high, the fame that she was talking about.
And I was talking about, like, in general, like, you do what people want to see, and the people watch what they want to see. So you're at the same time, you're kind of like manipulating them by catering to what they desire. It's kind of like a similar concept here. When they say mutually beneficial, they're trying to make it seem like they're benefiting you, right? As in, you have the desire to get benefit as well. It might be because of this desire right here is that the reason why we get duped and manipulated in the first place. That's my take on it. Anyways, great, I responded just before he cut me off by launching to another incomprehensible tirade of crypto jargon. Crypto bros are great at this. It's like half the battle is just confusing you enough that you're too embarrassed to ask for details. To be honest, I didn't care about the money at all. I was delusionally invested in building this alternative media platform, and might have been the only one in the room still under the misguided impression that this was the real purpose of the meme. I wasn't thrilled about the crypto angle, but it seemed like we might be able to make something work if they were genuinely interested in contributing a few $100,000 up front. Just as I started running through possibilities in my head, Tommy took the conversational reins again, and almost instantly destroyed any shred of serious credibility I managed to salvage with my admittedly naive but critical questions. Callie and George hadn't contributed much to the conversation at this point, but whenever they did, it would slightly bolster our social standing. If there was one thing they were good at, especially Colin, it was being the life of the party. He was a master of big grins, inside jokes, and flattery. They had both the skills for a successful business meeting, the production talent, and the marketing persuasiveness. Okay. However, considering we were all a decade younger than Tommy, we were hardly the focus of the business discussions. By the time we were leaving to get in the cars, Colin, George, and I had resigned ourselves to the reality that the whole thing was a bust. We did our best, but no one with even a fraction of their wits would give any of us access to real money, knowing it will all end up being snorted up Tommy's nose. We returned to our hotel in Bucharest feeling dejected, embarrassed, and unsure of where to go from here. It wasn't our first failure, and we knew it wouldn't be our last, but we needed to sleep and recharge before figuring out the next step. Expecting to retreat to my room and binge some Prison Break on my phone, Callan suddenly lit up with a completely different energy. They want to meet with you, Lauren. To be perfectly honest, I can't remember whether it was Colin or Tommy who got the text. It was a confusing game of telephone between different people. Maybe Tommy texted Callan, or maybe it was the other way around, but for some reason, I wasn't the one who got the invite directly. What? Yeah, they just reached out saying you impressed them at the meet, and the deal is still on if you're willing to meet with them before you leave tomorrow and sort out the details. Now, if you're reading this and screaming, "No, Lauren, I get it, I understand now, but there's very little you could have told a 22-year-old me to convince me I didn't have a real shot at saving the day." Despite my imposter syndrome and self-doubt, flying by the seat of my pants had generally worked up until this point. Maybe I really could be the key to getting this entire media company off the ground. Imagine that. Me saving the day. It seemed like a mean, free from the distraction of a drugged-out motor mouth, might actually get somewhere. I clung to the fantasy that I could turn this into something meaningful, as if my ambition could somehow justify the risk. They sent a car for me, and we headed back to the compound where the same group of men were waiting. No one was sitting at the desk, no papers or computers were out, they were just wandering around conversing, while I awkwardly waited for some kind of prompt to continue our discussions. "Hey Lauren, get over here." Andrew waved me over to the counter. Wait, can I do an Andrew Tate impression? "Hey, fuck it, bro. Hey, 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 Lauren, I can't, bro. I can't. Hey, Lauren, get over here." Andrew waved me over to the couch. "I want a picture with you." Tate barked it more like an old order, but his sing-song tone kept it light, almost playful. By now I was used to it. Ever since my sudden rise to internet fame a few years ago, people asking me for photos had become a routine. I barely thought twice about it. I sat beside him, and he casually wrapped his hand around my waist and tugged me in as someone snapped the shot. I wasn't used to men grabbing me like that. Tate did it like we'd been dating for years or something. It left me slightly uncomfortable, but I brushed it off. I still wonder what's become of that photo. It's probably on an old phone somewhere. "This is boring. Let's go somewhere more exciting." Andrew snapped while pacing. Tristan and the others agreed. Now, I was naive, but I wasn't that much of an idiot. I asked again when we discussed business and where exactly they wanted to go. "To the club. It's just around the block. We can take the cars. It'll be fun. And we'll discuss business there." At that moment, my nearly non-functional amygdala kicked in for the first time in ages, setting off alarm bells.
Maybe Tommy knew these people, but I didn't. Climbing into some flashy sports car with strangers, bound for a Euro trash club I'd never heard of, all while no one had a clue where I was. Yeah, hard pass. I looked for a way to play it cool. Hey, I'd rather not go out unless Tommy and the boys are coming too, I said, trying to keep it light. I've already texted them. We're sitting in the car now. Andrew replied assuredly, with a twinkle in his eye. Well, my excuse was gone. I'm sure if I'd really pushed, I could have demanded they take me back to my hotel. They probably would have taken me, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I was still on autopilot, lacking a strong sense of self, easily swayed by the smallest bit of pleasure. The most dangerous thing a young woman can be is a pushover. Given my own experiences, I can honestly say it's better to raise a bitch than a people pleaser. I imagine the same goes for men in their own way. We got in the cars, and Andrew raced through the back roads. Not long after we pulled up to the club, an all-black brick building with a bouncer at the door. The luxury cars were parked out front, and the low boom of bass music thudded underfoot as we walked down a narrow, dimly lit hallway to the main room. I'm sure you've seen this scene in the movies. Everything slows down, the background blurs, and someone steps through a doorway into another world. I turned the corner and blue neon light flooded my vision. Stages with gorgeous women, white leather couches, and was that fireworks? It was. I didn't even know what ball service was at the time, but the whole vibe of the place was mesmerizing. I was painfully out of place, an obvious North American, wearing jeans and black top, surrounded by Romanian girls in club dresses. Andrew offered to get me a drink. He snapped his fingers and waved over a serving girl, briskly ordering for both of us. Vodka soda, my usual, with lime. I was handed my drink. Just before taking a sip, I asked, "Any news on Tommy and the boys?" Andrew turned to me, meeting my eyes with intent. "They'll be here soon, don't worry," he winked. After spending time with him earlier in the day, I felt a certain warmth towards him. There was something about his energy that was calming, easy to lean into, easier still to ignore the small things that didn't sit quite right. People in the club kept approaching Andrew and Tristan, shaking their hands and chatting like old friends. They were clearly regulars here. I spent at least 10 minutes just trying to process my surroundings. The music blasting, the unfamiliar faces, the unspoken social cues I was clearly missing. The Tate brothers moved through it all effortlessly, naturals in this world. While they swam with ease, I felt like I was drowning. I figured I'd try to talk to Donnie, as he seemed to be the brains behind their operation. The financials, at least. Honestly, I still hadn't quite figured out what the hell was going on. We exchanged some small talk about Bitcoin, but before I could get a sense of where the conversation was heading, a tray of shots was brought over. The brothers ushered us all to cheers with them, while I sipped all my vodka soda. I wasn't quite ready for another drink until Tommy and the others arrived. "Where's Tommy? Where are Colin and George?" I shouted past the tray, my voice barely carrying over the pounding music. "The cars just arrived. They're on their way now." Andrew reassured me, leaning in close, his head nearly pressed to mine. His voice cut through the noise with ease, steady and sure. I studied the shot glass, and despite my hesitation, seeing the rest raise them, I joined in. We all threw them back. I winced as the burn hit. Never really got used to drinking anything stronger than my vodka sodas. It's funny how environment itself can make a behavior feel oddly natural. Surrounded by music, fireworks, and the shimmering energy of the club, it would feel weird to decline. Despite only having one shot and still working on my vodka soda, I found myself feeling surprisingly intoxicated. Usually, only beer hit me this quickly. I paid it no mind as I was fast distracted with conversation. Maybe it was the vibe of the club, or just the fact that I was coming off as the stereotypically fun, carefree blonde. But Donnie, who'd been friendly enough as we bantered about politics and online culture, suddenly seemed to take my relaxed demeanor as a green light. Or perhaps it was the only one or two edgy jokes I tossed out. Either way, his tone shifted. It was far more candid now. Yelling over the music, not yet drunk, he launched into an explanation of their entire operations. A series pump and dump crypto schemes raking in millions. He didn't try to hide it. It was all basically illegal and something they couldn't pull off in the US. "We've got the police wrapped around our fingers here," he bragged. Andrew had said almost the same thing at the compound during our initial meeting, but I brushed it off as some cheeky over-the-top bravado. Donnie went on, "An inside guide. We can do whatever we want and they can't do shit." He almost laughed as he said it, high on the absurdity. "And even if they do come after us, we'll just shut down shop, take the money, run to another Eastern European shithole. Hell, I'm getting close to that point now. We'll crash out and disappear." At this moment, any hope that the night might shift toward a legitimate investment discussion had faded entirely. In fact, I was struggling just to keep my eyes open. We hadn't even been there that long. I hadn't drunk much, but something was wrong. My body wasn't listening to me. The world was dimming. I couldn't stop it. I asked again about Tommy and the others, but kept getting vague answers. Just around the corner, they said. Eventually, I found myself crawling onto a couch at the back of the club. My eyelids fluttering closed, blue lasers and neon lights danced behind them, dragging me in and out of consciousness, pushing to the relentless hum of the heavy bass. I thought I felt a girl shake my shoulder, asking if I was okay. Honestly, I didn't care about anything except keeping my head in a comfortable spot on the white, foul-lettered couch. Time lost all meaning. I couldn't tell if 10 minutes or an hour had passed. Tommy and the boys never showed up. As far as I know now, a car was never even sent for them. The memories after that blurred together. I remember someone carrying me to a bathroom, standing outside the stall while I threw up. The nausea was overwhelming, and I think I might have even fallen asleep hugging the toilet for a while. Then Andrew was there again, lifting me up, carrying me through the dim hallway, my feet barely touching the ground, the bass of the music still shaking my body. I felt the cool night air hit my skin as the door to a sports car opened in front of me. A stupid fucking Bugatti, I'm sure. Chapter 11's Confessions. I read this part in Substack already, but I read so much, I have to take a break right now. Alright, now we shall continue from Chapter 11, which is Confessions. Alright, let me adjust the mic real quick, because I screwed it up a little bit. Come on, just twist, and there we go. Alright, let's see. So this chapter is called Confessions. Let me pull this down a bit. Okay. It was kind of my fault. I can trace every moment I had the opportunity to turn things around right up until the point when everything went wrong. The truth is, I could have said no to that strange business meeting overseas, at least until I had more information. I could have refused to go to the club until my friends were with me. I could have turned down the drinks with whatever little sense I had left. I could have said no to what I foolishly thought was a harmless cuddle when I had no intention of going any further. But honestly, I'm not sure it would have mattered at that point. This wasn't a case of mixed signals or intoxicated blurred lines. I fought back. I was pleading. I just didn't realize there was a point of no return, a moment where my voice would no longer have any power. I'd rather not give a detailed account, so I keep it simple. He carried me back to the hotel room and asked me to sleep beside him. I said yes. I was incredibly intoxicated, and some part of me convinced myself that because he was Tommy's best friend, he wasn't particularly dangerous. It was a poor decision, but it happened. He kissed me. I wasn't expecting it, and I wasn't looking forward it, but I kissed him back. But I kissed him back briefly and then told him I wanted to sleep. I was extraordinarily tired. He wanted to go further. I said no, very clearly, multiple times, and tried to pull his hands off me. He put his arm around my neck and began strangling me unconscious. Damn. Huh. I can't. Alright, whatever. I don't understand, like, what's going on. I tried to fight back. He repeatedly strangled me every time I regained enough consciousness to pull at his arms. I prefer not to share the rest, it's pretty obvious. Alright, so that paragraph right there is the one that is, in the news a lot, I guess, right now. Huh. And I did see the other side of it. Damn. What the hell? I've mentioned it before, but I'm once again reminded of how deeply I used to believe in that naive, almost cartoonish version of life, where I was the main character, nothing truly bad could happen, and danger didn't exist as long as you played it smart. I held on to a teenage, radical, anti-feminist idea that men weren't a real threat unless you let them be one. I had had experiences before where I set boundaries and they were respected, where a night ended with a cuddle, maybe a kiss, that was it, no pressure, no problem. Once or twice I even crashed in a male friend's hotel room or at their house after drinking, without the slightest concern they tried anything. The next morning it was just good morning, hope you're feeling better. Yeah, a lot of girls do probably think this way. Mixed signals, I mean, bro, how can you kind of tell? if they were into you or not. Alright? I'm not saying these were good decisions. I'm incredibly militant now, and I never put myself in a position like that again. But that was my life experience. I believe I could take all the risks I wanted and still be fine. I didn't know how to cope when that belief shattered. When I finally faced the real consequences of taking those risks, it broke me psychologically. I cycled through different forms of denial. It's taken me years to even begin to process it clearly, and to take full responsibility for my own behavior. It's easier to convince others that evil completely ensnares us without any willingness on our part, but evil isn't always the obvious stuff. It's the small decisions we make that put us in compromising positions. I heard this anecdote once that the devil doesn't just leap out at anyone, he whispers, urging us to step a little closer to the fence, to come see what he's doing, to lower our defenses, have a drink, and not think too much. We indulge, we take a step forward, and he tells us small lies, how all our friends will soon be at the fence, curious too. He reassures us that it's safe to sit on the fence between him and God, to get a better view of what he's offering, without making any real decisions. But then in the final moment, you feel claws around your arm, dragging you, screaming, while the devil smiles and tells you the fence always belonged to him. Okay. You can scream all you want about how you never wanted to go along. You can fight back in vain, but deep down, a part of you allowed yourself to get wrapped up in the lies. You drink the wine he offers, you let yourself get that close. You don't have discernment. Don't get vulnerable with the devil if you don't want to end up in hell. I mean, really. I suppose I can't entirely fault conservative media for turning Andrew Tate into a hero, though for a while I certainly did. He's not a fool despite the persona he crafts online. Bro, online he doesn't seem like a fool either, bro. He seems very calculating, you know? Manipulative, calculative, but that goes in ties with smartness too. Of course, dude, it's the top G. There's a depth to him, a sharp social intelligence that, in another life, might have been a force for good. It's a true shame. You can catch glimpses of that potential in his messages urging men to better themselves. But in the end, even those moments are not separate from the larger arc of his influence. They too are absorbed into a worldview where power is the only currency, and dominance, not character, defines a man's worth. My frustration grew over time, though, as more and more evidence came to light about this man's operations. At least when I met him, I had no idea. My comfortable state of denial was being involuntarily shattered daily. Videos and messages surfaced of Tate discussing grooming underage girls, manipulating and lying to put women in horrific situations, and scamming men out of their life savings. As I write this, he's still under house arrest for alleged sex trafficking and exploitation, including repeated sexual relations and acts with a 15-year-old. Frankly, you didn't need my story to see the direction it all pointed. You could just listen to what the man himself was saying. I understand the concept of radical responsibility. Well, women have freedom now. They can make choices that put them in danger or compromise them. Oh well, you asked for this, ladies. Fine, so be it. Blame the women. What I don't understand is how the right-wing media in particular could make a hero of this man after all the evidence of his character had been released. Conservatives, even just 100 years ago, would have strung up people in the streets for less than what the Tate brothers do on any given weekend. Men that understood that part of building a strong society is protecting people, especially young women, from predators and pimps. Instead, we got a bunch of self-proclaimed conservative men who drag themselves naked across broken glass for the chance to serve up softball interviews with a man who is facing nearly 3 times as many charges as Hunter Biden ever did, each of them far more serious. Can you imagine if a Democrat had said even a fraction of what was stated in his Hitler Slurs University videos? We've got a library of damning Tate footage. Epstein never even gave us that much to work with. Tate literally admitted to moving to Romania because it's easier to get away with crimes. When it comes to conservative media's reaction, it was willful ignorance in pursuit of fame and money, nothing short of that. A lot of people received a lot of money, intention to pick a side and cover up what they certainly knew to be morally rotten behavior, if not significant criminality. Oh, don't forget the fear. A lot of influencers had been to that compound. A lot of people with high public profiles had been involved in that business. I didn't even realize how bad things were, how deep the rot went in the media space at this point. No matter, I had no intentions of getting into it. How embarrassing was it that I even ended up in that situation in the first place? Who was I to blame conservative media figures for lionizing Tate, when I had my own failures as a self-proclaimed conservative media figure under my belt? Not to mention, I'm sure I conducted a few softball interviews of my own. My first draft of this section, I just brushed over this entire experience. Of course, the same thing I did all those years ago. It didn't happen, I told myself. In fact, Andrew and I were on great terms. We were still talking over WhatsApp. He was asking to visit me. I had no intention of allowing that to occur, but I humored him to preserve my own sanity or maybe further my own delusion. I wasn't sure. In the end, I thought it didn't matter. Wasn't sure, huh? Okay. All I knew was that I wasn't going to let myself care about it too deeply, so I acted like I didn't. Cognitive dissonance makes people normalize the absurd, as if mentally reclassifying the event afterward can restore some illusion of control. Cognitive dissonance, okay? The last conversation we had in person consisted of Andrew telling me I'd better not tell the press about what he'd done as I packed my bags to rush out of my hotel room. Okay. Let me just scratch my eye a bit. I told him not to worry. I was the girl against feminism after all. I couldn't be doing that. I spent so long fighting the idea of victimhood on ideological grounds that of course I would ignore my own on those same grounds. It wouldn't be very helpful to the cause, or my career for that matter, for me to become exactly what I criticized, a victim. Worse, a woman, victim of a man, one who literally did everything wrong. Why was I out drinking in a strange country with strange men? What did I expect? I didn't allow myself to consider that there would be others after me. If I did, I figured they made stupid decisions the same as I did. I certainly never imagined the minds of an entire generation would be assaulted by Tate. Not just women. I can't help but wonder if there was a moment when I could have been more honest, more direct about the forces that would later shape the psyche of millions. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything, but maybe it would have made a difference to someone, given a few people a reason to pause, to think twice. Instead, I told the secret was safe with me. What was one more secret in this world of politics anyways? It took a few weeks before my denial was slowly replaced by a small but persistent sense of guilt. Guilt that I was setting others up for failure. Even if I could take responsibility for my own mistakes, I knew his actions weren't mistakes. They were calculated and intentional. Exactly, bro. That's what he is. I finally cracked and texted him, breaking the act, saying what he did was wrong. At the very least, he needed to understand that so he wouldn't treat others the same way. Of course, I knew he already knew this, but I also felt certain I would never go to court. I didn't believe in punishing anyone over such a serious accusation without overwhelming evidence. I wouldn't have believed in another woman who made the same exact same set of claims. In fact, I would have torn myself apart. I wouldn't have been able to survive my own scrutiny. I made too many decisions that indicated at the very least reckless irresponsibility. As for holding him to account publicly, good joke. I already knew how that would go. Whether a crime had been committed would be a secondary concern. The real question would be whether I was the kind of person who deserved my fate. Every failed relationship, every poor decision, every moment of bad judgment would be dissected under a microscope. For Tate, hiring a PR firm and weaponizing other influencers, especially those whose reputation are tied to yours, to discredit potential claimants is just the cost of doing business. Best case, my story gets hijacked by some slick HBO showrunner with a savior complex. Repackaged into a glossy docudrama where the women are written as if they got no internal monologue. Idiots, victims of hyper-captivating men. The outcome was painfully obvious, especially with the amount of money and blackmail at play. People get killed over this sort of stuff, and I'd been privy to conversations with powerful people that implied as much. My brief confrontation was less about justice and more about easing my own guilt. The guilt of knowing that I was embarrassed by my own behavior in this situation, and that, given the choice, I would absolutely stay silent for the sake of the cause. Perhaps even more so to preserve my own sense of control, to avoid the reputational bloodbath I feared. I guess this is the real world, I told myself, and I'd be damned before I admitted I hadn't been prepared for it. Andrew eventually apologized for making me think badly of him, as he put it. But the apology only came after a barrage of anger and veiled threats. He reminded me that I had consented to cuddling, that he'd been drunk too, as if those facts nullified everything that came after. I told him plainly that I had said no, clearly and repeatedly, that he gotten violent in response. He told me to go to the police. I laughed and reminded him of his own words, that the police were already paid off. I wasn't reaching out to seek justice or vengeance. I just wanted him to understand I wouldn't be complicit in this delusion that what he'd done was okay. I thanked him for the apology and cut off contact. He reached out again and offered to bring flowers. I still didn't reply. I know this is going to sound weird, but I do think he meant his apology, or at least hope it would entice me to begin speaking with him again. Either way, it wasn't the closure I hoped for. I didn't expect any, though. It's now 7 years later. He reached out again offering flowers, and then she thinks he does meant his apology. Is that part of his cold, calculating, manipulative tactics, or is that genuine? She thinks it's genuine. She feels it's genuine, though. Because, let's see. She thinks he meant his apology. But, I guess you can just kind of tell if they actually meant it or not by looking at what their past and future actions are. Yeah, this is before he turns a Muslim, I think. I don't hate Andrew. I know that may sound strange, especially in contrast to the things I've expressed on these pages, but it's complex. He's still human. When he apologized to me, he admitted he doesn't have much of a conscience, but if it's still there, I hope he wrestles with it. I hope one day it wins. I hope he becomes the soul he could have been, instead of the one consumed by his vices. Whether behind bars or free, but I don't think he even realizes he's been consumed. Like so many in his position, he's likely never let himself dig that deep because there's too much pain waiting there. I believe change is possible. I absolutely believe in redemption for Andrew Tate. But understand why people do what they do and hoping for their greatest spiritual good doesn't mean they shouldn't be stopped, especially when they've lost themselves so completely that they leave destruction in their wake. I have forgiven him truly, but that doesn't mean he should be free to keep hurting, tormenting, and scamming others. If I ever lost myself to that degree, there have been moments where those paths felt dangerously close. I hope there would be people willing to stand up to me. Huh? If she ever lost herself to that degree, she hoped people would stand up to her, huh? Okay. Additional note, upon completion of this manuscript, I've finally decided to leave in this chapter of the book. At first I wrote it just to process my own emotions, convincing myself no one would ever read it. For a while I thought about replacing parts with dramatized, anonymized scenes to avoid drawing too much attention. But after a lot of reflection, I realized I'm done with cowardice. If I'm going to do an honest book, I'll do it right, and this is a big part of my story. Why now, though? It's a very valid question. I know how people think, oh, you're deciding to tell this story in your book, to make sales. What about the legal cases? Can't believe you didn't help earlier. I should start by debunking some misconceptions here. First, I will be releasing all the chapters relevant to Tate for free. It's not about money, and frankly, I'd rather not give people another excuse to project their own twisted motivations onto me. Not that I'm too worried about the opinions of anyone who thinks human trafficking and scamming men out of their life savings is some kind of noble vocation. Second, I've always believed these matters should be handled by the legal system wherever possible, rather than turn into a public spectacle. As I mentioned earlier, I had no desire to put my face on any public claims at first. Instead, I oscillated between denial and my own harsh judgments of women who came forward with similar accusations. Why didn't you go to the police? That would be the right thing to do. Why didn't you go to the hospital? That would be the right thing to do. Ironically, my extreme judgment of others pushed me to make some of the right choices early on. I embraced denial, but deep down I knew what really happened. I reluctantly reached out to the UK authorities the next day, feeling it was the right thing to do, only to be met with indifference. They told me an investigation could only be pursued in Romania, a country where I had been explicitly warned about police corruption. I went deeper into a dissociative state as a result, feeling certain there would never be a resolution. Hey, yo! They called the police, dude, but the police is just a procedure enforcement. They enforce procedures made by bureaucracy. So, they're right. They can't do anything about it. Unless you got some hero that is brave enough to go against the system of procedures we have in the... Alright, anyways. Attempts to involve Canadian authorities later led to similar dead ends. While I'm sure plenty will like to claim the investigation to Tate is a deep state operation, if anything, the state didn't help at all. They honestly didn't seem to give a shit. I wasn't looking to start a legal battle. I was just looking for any interest at all in helping me make sense of what was going on in Tate's compound in a way that would keep me anonymous. Years passed before Tate's antics made it onto the radar of Western authorities, due to repeated claims from other women that had nothing to do with me. Eventually, a larger U.S. investigation reached out for my assistance, and I provided what information I could off the record. I did everything possible while trying to maintain my anonymity, but for the most part, I bared it until I began writing this. Being a witness in any official capacity would have required revealing my identity, something I wanted to avoid at all costs. Still, over the years, public exposure started to feel inevitable. Someone I once naively trusted shared parts of my story with journalists without my consent. That disclosure results in others posting distorted versions of events online or in published words for political activism purposes, clearly with no real concern about the potential crimes happening or whether I wanted my story public or not. At one point, even Tommy, worried about his own connection to the situation, put out videos trying to get ahead of the story circulating online by preemptively claiming I would make false accusations. He recently did this again, just before the publication of this book, completely lying about the events that occurred. You'll read more about that later. Ironically, I was the last person on Earth who wanted to talk about it, but everyone else, including those who wanted me to remain silent, kept forcing the situation into the spotlight. The more they did, the more journalists showed up in my inbox prying for a statement I never wanted to give. If my silence over the past 7 years hasn't made it clear enough, the last thing I wanted is attention for this. I have an entire archive of replies to those reporters telling them to fuck off and leave me alone. Regardless, it's always felt like only a matter of time whether I choose to tell the story myself or leave it to journalists, activists, and paid smear campaigns to do it for me. I'd much rather tell my own story with all its flaws than let a wave of outsiders who have no real understanding of what actually happened shape the narrative in my place. Of course, there will still be plenty of commentary from old colleagues eager to highlight my character flaws, some true, some not, to muddy the waters. It will be interesting, though, to watch them contend with a simple fact. I have made only 2 accusations of assault to authorities in my entire life. One was in Australia, where the handsy man was promptly arrested and jailed after CCTV and his serial offense record confirmed my account. The other being Andrew Tate, who, despite my silence years later, became infamous for allegations of human trafficking and sexual assault. Equally hard to pass off as mere coincidence is the fact that I went to a women's hospital and had a report made around a week after the event. The report documented my account of asphyxiation. 5 years before Vice News would report in 2023 that Tate used the same method on other victims in the UK in 2015. If this were some elaborate ploy for attention, I have to be clairvoyant to have predicted the rise on this man's profile and his methods before anyone even knew who he was. Not that anyone wants this kind of attention, no one wants to be a victim, especially not when you come from my political background. I know exactly what's coming. I'll be crucified online. I'm not looking for sympathy. I don't expect a victim trophy from any side. I'm publishing this simply because it's the truth, and far too few people are telling the truth these days. And here's another sad truth about the political world. It's absolutely not just women falling victim to sexual violence. Young men are preyed on too. Often in the same spaces, often with the same devastating silence. The social stigma of shame that keeps women quiet also keeps men from speaking out, sometimes even more intensely. It reminds me of the case of serial rapist Ray Sinaga in the UK, who assaulted at least 136 men. He was so difficult to catch because most of his victims remained silent. Even when police presented them with the recorded video evidence of their assaults, many still denied it had happened. I understand, I really do. This culture needs to change for both men and women, and that change shouldn't be a politically partisan issue. I don't have all the answers, but I do know it won't happen by reducing the conversations to slogans like "Believe all X" or by reflexively dismissing people as liars, seeking attention. Personally, I prefer handling matters privately through legal channels, but as I hope you understand, perhaps even more so after reading this book in its entirety, that was never truly an option for me, and it isn't for everyone. Sometimes the only solace people find is in telling their story. Alright. Obviously, Lauren was extremely brave for telling her story like that, exposing it to the whole world. Because she knows she's going to get shit on the internet just like how she is right now. And at the same time, that exposes why so many people online just like weirdos, you know? Ugh. Well, our generation might be cooked. But maybe she's right. Telling the truth like this, exposing the stuff, will get people to see it for real. And then this was going to help. It's going to help in morality, hopefully. Maybe this is the right track. Alright.